live and stream the meeting.
Gave up Cox and went to YouTube because they were more reasonable. But now YouTube is raising their prices.
Oh, you went YouTube TV? Oh, I use Hulu for TV. That's my no, but that's what I pay for instead of Cox or YouTube. Okay, so for those of you who are joining us online or on YouTube, I am going to share our screen. You will mostly see the screen and not us, but that is okay. Welcome, friends, and let's get started, as we always do, with our blessing for the study of Torah that ends La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. You say amen and you get full credit. Blessed is God who blesses us through commandments and also commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Or literally la'asok, right? What is asakah? Business. To busy oneself, literally, to do the right. So anyway, okay. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 29, verse 1, and where we left off, of course, our erstwhile, he's our former hero Saul, and he went and did that thing he knew he wasn't supposed to do. I don't know the page number. I just know it's Samuel 29, 1. Do you have a page number for whatever book?
I got it.
Okay.
Thank you. On this book.
Terrific. Excellent. Okay. So, of course, Saul did what he wasn't supposed to do, and he went and inquired of the dead prophet Samuel's spirit and said, Samuel, what do I do? The walls are closing in on me. I'm going to lose my kingdom. Of course, Samuel says, of course you are. That was always the plan. I told you when I was alive that you were going to lose the king. Like, congratulations, you made it to the end. You're going to be with me now. And Saul is very upset to hear this. Samuel doesn't really care and is mostly upset that his peace was disturbed. And Saul falls on the floor, but his friends give him some food and tell him, you got to buck up and meet your fate. So he finally gets up and leaves. And that is the moment that we pick up on here. So in 1 Samuel chapter 29, verse 1, the Philistines mustered all their forces at Aphek, while Israel was encamping at the spring in Jezreel. The Philistine lords came marching, each with his units of hundreds and of thousands. And David and his men came marching last with Achish, right? Because David said he would help this group of, he was going to work with this Philistine group. The Philistine officers asked, who are those Hebrews? Why, that's David, the servant of King Saul of Israel. Achish answered the Philistine officers. He has been with me for a year or more, and I have found no fault in him from the day he defected until now. He vouches for him, right? Achish vouches for David because they're like, look, Philistines and Hebrews, we're the big enemies. Why is this guy marching with us? And Achish goes, don't worry. He's been with me for a while. It's not like he just came to me yesterday. He says to them essentially, don't worry. It's not a ruse. He's on our side. Okay. Sure. Right. So, but the Philistine officers were angry with Achish, and the Philistine officers said to him, send the man back. Let him go back to the place you assigned him. Let him go guard your town, Why is he here? He shall not march down with us to the battle, or else he may become our adversary in battle. For with what could that fellow appease his master, if not with the heads of those involved? Right? If he decides he'd rather go back to being an Israelite, well, he could easily turn coat on them in the middle of the battle. And surely Saul would take him back if he did that and helped Saul win. So the Philistine officers are a little more savvy than Achish seems to be. Maybe he's one of the lesser of the Philistine lords. And they say in verse 5, which we recite all the time, right? Remember, he is the David of whom they sang as they danced. Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands, right? He was the top guy at killing Philistines. And now you're going to send him into battle with us? Like in the back, where he could just be like, okay, just keep going with the swords and just smush. It's like you're putting us in a really risky position here, Achish. Right. So Achish summoned David and said to him, as God lives, which again, we generally is just one of those, we have lots of phrases today we say that are idioms or what, when they say that, that's like, it's like, I swear, right? It's like, right. I believe, right? As God lives, you have been honest, and I would like to have you serve in my forces. For I have found no fault with you from the day you joined me until now. But you are not acceptable to the other lords or governors. So go back in peace and do nothing to displease the Philistine lords. Right? He says, okay, you know that town you live in outside my town with your guys, just go. Go hang out there. We'll see you later. I couldn't convince them that you were good, though I believe it. And so you got to go. But of course, David wants to be at this battle. This is going to be the moment, right? He's like, I have to be there. So David's going to be like, oh man, what would you say if you had to be there? And he says, hey man, I trust you, but my friends don't. So I'm going to need you to take a step back on this. What would you say? Are you as savvy as David? It's okay. You don't have to be. I don't know. To me, I would say, and I don't think I'm giving anything, I would be like, hey man, I really feel like we had a connection and that I've done good by you. And I just want to prove myself. Right?
All the while planning.
Yeah. All the while planning what we all know David's planning. What the Philistines seem to also know David is planning. Everybody but Achish has got a good savvy handle on this on what's going on right now. So what does David say? In verse 8, David, however, said to Achish, but what have I done? What fault have you found in your servant from the day I appeared before you to this day, that I should not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king? Right? Now, we already know, Achish already told him I found no fault in you, right? But he's, right? Maybe you've never done this, right? You're not manipulative, you never are, but maybe you've had children. Because children they're manipulative, right? And they're bad at it because they've never lived, so they don't know what it is. They try the worst things when they're young kids, right? To manipulate you. Like, I don't know, I can't even make it up, but you hear it and you go, whew, I'd hate to be somebody who fell for that. Like that, yikers. That's what David's pulling on Achish here, really. Even though Achish already said, yes, I trust you. Yes, I know you're good. He says, but don't you think I'm good? Don't you think that I've come here to help you, my lord the king? It's really laying it on thick, I think you might say, right? Okay, so David says, I just want to serve you. I just want to help. I've always been a helper, and I just want to help you.
He's assuming that Achish has a Jewish conscience.
Oh, well, I mean, I see what you like, some guilt, right? So a little bit of Jewish guilt. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of that. Yeah, I mean, it's this, he's lathering him up. He's like, look, man, I've been so on your side and it hurts. It hurts that you don't trust me. Even though you say it's them, it feels like it hurts that you don't trust me. And Achish, he's such a sensitive guy. Achish is a big sensitive guy. And Achish, he replies to David in verse 9. He says, I know you are as acceptable to me as an angel of God. But the Philistine officers have decided that you must not march out with us to battle. right? As an angel of God, to me, you are completely virtuous. You might as well be a Philistine, just like me. Okay. But he does stick to his guns, right? He does, right? So there you go. He says, but they said, can't happen. But what does he do? He says, verse 10, so rise early in the morning, right? Because it's nighttime. That's that we can tell from that it's nighttime. So he's saying, don't go now. It's too late. Sleep then in the morning at first light, which is typical for militaries to, that's when they start getting ready for the day. And so, okay, when you get up in the morning, take your guys and head out. You and your Lord's servants who came with you, rise early in the morning and leave as soon as it is light. Accordingly, David and his men rose early in the morning to leave, to return to the land of the Philistines, while the Philistines marched up to Jezreel. So this is this is how he's going to, it's one of these moments where he can't be there, right? He has to take this. But the rabbis will suggest actually that he's glad of this. Because now he doesn't have to commit to anything. He doesn't have to turn on anybody, and he doesn't have to obviously attack Israelites, which he's not willing to do. So he doesn't have to attack Israelites, and he doesn't have to turn on anybody, which allows him to buy time. Maybe Saul will meet, God will decide Saul's end. And he's already said he's not going to kill him. His presence for Saul's death isn't necessary. His presence in Israel afterwards to assume the kingship is. So there's some ambiguity here, which is like, the question is, who is David? And Chronicles will give you a more colored version of David, but from the David through Samuel, which is more likely? Was David eager to fight with Achish? Maybe he loved Achish. Maybe he really wanted to help Achish. Was he trying to get out of it? Was he trying to get into the fight so that he could be a hero? What was David's what was he doing here?
Don't have the answer. My guess is that he would never have fought against Israel. But then I struggle with, what is the point of this story? David has always been the man of honor, the man of truth. And here we have him, in a way, living a lie.
Well, it's interesting because this is the difficulty. It wants you to see that difficulty, by the way. Keep in mind that this is very much a Deuteronomic text. And what is the Deuteronomic historian? What is the Deuteronomic voice in Tanakh say?
God asks you, things will be good.
Yes. And also, and a less obvious but still very important note, kings are bad. Who's the king? God is the king. Very clearly. Earthly kings are always going to have a problem. What's that? They're human. They're going to mess up. God, through Samuel, tries to tell the people that at the beginning of the book. They say, we want a king. We saw what happened in the Judges period. And to be fair, we read that. It was bad. They said, we want a king like all the people around us. And Samuel says, God is your king. You are better than the people around you because they are governed by self-interested, corruptible humans. And the people said, well, we don't feel like we're being ruled by anybody. And so God said, okay, they can have a king, but they'll see what the problem will be with that. And the problem is, even if they're the best person, they're going to have to deal with the human reality of politicking. And by the way, David will see what happens when you fail to properly deal with the human politicking. Because this isn't the first time he's on the run, the last time he's on the run and in caves. Right? I mean, his son is going to come from, sorry to spoiler alert, but, right? Because he doesn't handle, he's too above what's happening in his own court. And that doesn't feel good. It feels like there's a corruption that lives within this institution, because there is. But we knew that was going to be the case. And God said, it's not you they've rejected, but me. And they'll see that the king is not the best way. It's a way. It's not the best way. I personally think today we found a much better way, but in any event, so yeah, I mean, that you're supposed to take from this story that David is faced with real human choice. One of the things you can take away from it is that he's faced with real human choices about power and politics, and that no amount of I am God's choice, like it's this tension we always see in Tanakh, which is the attempt to be not perfect, but just good, to always be good, a baseline to be what God wants us to be and to do what God wants us to do. And the necessary things that happen in the world that impact how successful we are at that. So I would say that that's the purpose of the story. And also, as we get to the end of the book, it's important to set the stage. They have to go fight. The Philistines have to go fight this battle. So, but David's not there. So chapter 30. Does anyone have any questions, by the way? We're at the end of a chapter. I want to stop for questions.
Does David know that Saul is going to fall at this point?
He knows Saul is going to fall at some point. He's been told that God will bring it about. So he doesn't doubt it. He just goes, it'll happen. I don't know when it'll happen, but it'll happen. And it's not going to happen because of me, because twice now he's had the opportunity to kill him and specifically said to him, hey, I'm not going to kill you. God's going to take care of it, but I'm not going to do it. Which again, builds points for David, both in piety and in politics. By saying it'll be God, and also not killing the king yourself, which is, Omri was one of the Omride dynasty was one of the better dynasties in the kingdom of Israel. But Omri took the throne by assassination. So his whole house is kind of tainted by that, right? Even though we go into, yes, God ordained it and all, assassination never feels good. Yeah.
Is it the only way to test character is through war?
At this time, it's one of the major ways to test character. The Torah has many ways of testing character. Remember the story of Judah and Tamar? Judah and Tamar, where Tamar was supposed to marry Judah's son and did. And then he died. And so he married the woman to his second son, and that son died. So he's supposed to marry that woman to his third son. And he said, you know what? My third son's kind of young. Why don't you go live with your dad again for a bit? And when he's old enough, I'll marry him to you. But his other two sons had died when she was married to them, so he didn't really plan to do that. So years go by, and she's still living with her dad, right? I'm sorry, I'm telling the long version of the story. But so she's still living with her dad, and she's like, hey, the son is old enough that I should be married already. What's going on? So she goes and she dresses herself up a little bit like a lady of the street, or I don't know, knight. And she goes and Judah doesn't recognize her, and he decides to have a good time. And he leaves his staff behind, his very recognizable I'm a son of Jacob staff. He leaves. Later on, he's told that his daughter-in-law, Tamar, was caught playing a prostitute. And she's going to be killed. And so he goes to condemn her. And she says, before you do, can you tell me whose staff and cords this belonged to? Because the guy who slept with me left them here. And Judah sees the staff and the cords and realizes what he's done. And he says to her, in front of others, you were more right than I. And she is spared. It's not a perfect story and it's not a perfect ending, but it's another way of showing character development that isn't war, was the reason I told that story. The Torah has many ways of showing character development, and not all of them are war. But David is a warrior king, so most of his stories are going to revolve around war because that's his archetype. He's not a philosopher. I mean, he evolves into a philosopher king, but he's not that, and that gets him into trouble too. But he doesn't start that way. He starts very much as a warrior king, and that's his archetype, and that's what we're writing around. It wouldn't make sense to be like, he's a warrior king, but we never talk about war, only about studying Torah right now. Like, it's like that would be weird because that wouldn't fit into how he became, how he rose. But he will become more of that David as life progresses for him because he has a decently long life and he goes over the course of a couple books. Anyway, are there other questions before we move forward? Hearing none, we shall proceed. Chapter 30. By the time David and his men arrived in Ziklag, that town of theirs, on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and against Ziklag. They had stormed Ziklag and burned it down. So while they were gone, those Amalekites. And what do we know about the Amalekites? This is their MO, right? This is their modus operandi. This is how they operate. They attacked the children and the weak and the women and stuff like that when there are no men to protect them, like they did in the wilderness when they attacked our rear, as we were marching through the Negev. So Amalekites, what you gonna do? I mean, prescribe them, right? They had taken the women in it captive, low-born and high-born alike. They did not kill any, but carried them off and went their way. When David and his men came to the town and found it burned down, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive, David and the troops with him broke into tears until they had no strength left for weeping. They lost everything. I mean, all their property and all their family. I mean, that's everything. Yeah.
He's the real man. He can be a warrior, but he can cry too.
Right. Sure. They cried until they had no strength left to do it any further. David's two wives have been taken captive, Ahinoam of Yezreel and Abigail, Eshet Naval, HaKarmeli, which is, it's funny that she's still referenced as the wife of Naval, even though she's married to David and Naval is dead. So it's just like, it's like just because you remember from that story we told you a couple chapters ago. Remember Naval? It's that Abigail who was the wife of Naval before she was too smart for him and married David after, and anyway. Okay, so both of them had been taken. Of course, it says, right, two wives here. Where's, well, we'll get to the third wife. David was in great danger, for the troops threatened to stone him. For all the troops were embittered on account of their sons and daughters. But David sought strength in the eternal his God. Right? It's because they're not like, David is responsible because he brought them to this right? And then they come back. They didn't even fight. They didn't get anything, which again, a lot of the times, most of the mercenary guys who joined bands like this to fight did it to make money. They were the crypto bros of their day. They're risking everything to try and make a bunch of money in sheep and gold and slaves and whatever you made money in those days. And so they have nothing. They came back with nothing. They lost everything because it burned down. Their families are gone. You blame the leader. That's natural. If you have a leader who makes the decisions and their decisions lead you to this, you feel a little bit there. So they're focused on their anger and their pain. But David was a little bit different because David clung to God, trusted in God, and he wasn't dispirited. In other words, David kept his strength when others lost it because David had God. They could have had God too. The implication here is that it's not just because David is special, but because David was open to it. David is, like many important great men of Judaism, he's a lonely man of faith, like Abraham was, like Moses was. When all those around him are without being focused on God, David is, or is able to be, which gives him strength, which a lot of people find in modern days, even when they have a connection to God or to the divine, whatever you want to call your connection. It brings them strength. It helps them recover better from things. It helps. I mean, it's just there's no word for this. There's no definitive like pill for faith. But it helps, and it helps David here. So verse 7, David said to the priests, Aviatar, son of Ahimelech, bring the ephod up to me. When Aviatar brought the ephod to David, David inquired of God, shall I pursue those raiders? Will I overtake them? Right? He had, right? It's his own Urim and Tumim, I guess. And what's the response? Pursue, right? Tirdov, right? Rodef. Rodov here, it says. But still, Rodef, pursue. For you shall overtake and you shall rescue. The Hatzel Tatzil. Right? You're going to be successful. You're going to be victorious. So David and the 600 men with him set out, and they came to the Wadi Besor, where a halt was made by those who were to be left behind. David continued the pursuit with 400 men. 200 men had halted, too faint to cross the Wadi Besor. It was too hard for them to ford the river. They were not strong enough at that point. In the open country, they came upon an Egyptian and brought him to David. They gave him food to eat and water to drink. So they treated him well, this Egyptian they found. He was also given a piece of pressed fig cake and 2 cakes of raisins, which again, these are sweet. These are nice things. These aren't just like hardtack. Right. He ate and regained his strength, for he had eaten no food and drunk no water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David asked him, again, they say this to say they treated him well. Again, hospitality is a key part of Judaism. And so David treated him hospitably, and then when he'd recovered, now it's time to debrief him. We won't call it interrogation. We'll call it debriefing, right? He was like, okay, tell us your story. So to whom do you belong and where are you from? I am a Na'ar Mitzri, right? I am an Egyptian boy or young man. He answered, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me when I fell ill 3 days ago. We had raided the Negev of the Cherethites and the Negev of Judah and the Negev of Kalev. We also burned down Ziklag. What do you know? And David said to him, can you lead me down to that band? He replied, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into my master's hands, and I will lead you down to that band. So David grants it. He must, because so he let him down. And there they were, scattered all over the ground, eating and drinking and making merry because of all the vast spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. David attacked them from before dawn until the evening of the next day. None of them escaped, except 400 young men who mounted camels and got away. Okay. So except for all those guys, the cavalry just ran, and that left only whoever was left, and David was going to wipe the floor with them. So verse 18, David rescued everything the Amalekites had taken. David also rescued his 2 wives. Nothing of theirs was missing, young or old, sons or daughters, spoil or anything else that had been carried off. David recovered everything. David took all the flocks and herds which the troops drove ahead of the other livestock, and they declared, "This is David's spoil." Right? Because he rallied them up to this. They were despondent, laying in the burned wreckage of their town. And he's the one who said, God says we're going to get him. Get up, let's go. And they believed him because he was their leader. And then they won. It was like a Hail Mary, except, Jewish and not football. So it was big. So they're like, oh, again, they're back on. David's riding high again because he's, it's a good sign when you win big battles and restore people's families to them. I mean, again, they thought they lost their families. Now they have their families back. It's wonderful. When David reached the 200 men who were too faint to follow David and who had been left at the Wadi Besor, they came out to welcome David and the troops with him. David came forward with the troops and greeted them. Right? And Steinsaltz, they didn't just greet them, but inquired after their welfare, which is like he fought a battle. They were just resting, but he cares about them. He's like, you were ill. That's why we left you behind. Are you better? How you doing? And now they're going to be like, yeah. Although not everyone's going to be as generous of spirit to the injured and the tired as David. Verse 22, but all the mean and churlish ones among the men who had accompanied David spoke up. Since they did not accompany us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we seized, except that each may take his wife and children and go. Right? Of course, they're not saying we're going to keep your families as our spoil, but you're not getting anything from this. You're going to get your family back. That's it. I guess not even your stuff from your houses. You just, if there was any of that, they didn't have a lot of stuff also. It should be noted. It's not like today where we have a lot of stuff. There was no China making stuff then. I mean, they made some stuff, but not stuff that, anyway. Okay. David, however, spoke up. You must not do that, my brothers, in view of what God has granted us, guarding us and delivering into our hands the band that attacked us. So again, there are these rude people who are being churlish and mean and David is like, bros, we can't be this way. This is a great day. We won a great victory. God is with us. Save your anger for the Amalekites. Right? And so he continues, how could anyone agree with you in this matter? The share of those who remain with the baggage shall be the same as the share of those who go down to battle. They shall share alike. Oh, David's a communist. No, I'm just kidding. He's not a communist, but he does believe kind of in pooling tips, right? He's like, look, we win as a group. And so whatever your role is, in this case, you were watching the stuff, but still, you win with the group. The group wins together because we're a team, which is good for teams. It's not good when teams are stratified by status necessarily. I mean, militaries is a different thing, but real militaries also don't take spoils. So, it's a different kind of situation. Of course, David got more than everybody. It's good to be the king. What can I say? Okay. So from that day on, it was made a fixed rule for Israel, continuing to the present day. So there you go. That's the rule for Israel. Everybody gets the same, not in general, just, when it comes to spoils from war. We don't say, oh, you did that and you did that and that, you'll get 20% because you did this and we don't do it that way. Everybody we break it up, everyone gets a part. Right, we're a community. And by the way, the rabbis will later institute something called the communal fund, essentially, where every community is supposed to set up a fund. In our community, it essentially functions as the rabbi's discretionary fund, but a fund for if someone is impoverished or in need, whether it's just for a Shabbos meal or whether it's they need rent money or whatever it is, the community can help them. We try and give to each other. We try and bring things together. That's why there are all these Jewish community foundations, and that's how we start up hospitals and stuff. And we're not the only religious group that does it. Lots of religious groups do, but it's part of this. This is the evolution of this, this idea of the communal fund. So verse 26, when David reached Ziklag, he sent some of the spoils to the elders of Judah and to his friends, saying, "This is a present for you from our spoil of God's enemies." He sent the spoil to the elders in Beit El, Ramot Negev, and Yatir, in Aror, Sifmot, and Eshtemoa, in Rakal, in the towns of the Yerelmites, in the towns of the Kenites, in Hormah, Bor Ashan, and Atrach, and to those in Hebron, all the places where David and his men had roamed. So they got so much from the Amalekites, because remember, the Amalekites didn't just hit their town. They hit the whole south, places that are Philistine, places that are Jewish. So what does David do with some of this spoil that was his? He distributes it to the elders of these towns. Why would he do that?
It sets a community. They're part of the community.
They're part of the community. They're part of his community.
It's gratitude and it's great politics.
Yeah.
It's both of those things. We were grateful for when you let us live amongst you. Just so you know, we're still out here winning wars against God's enemies. Is Saul winning wars? Is he sending spoils to you when you didn't do anything and you went and got your spoil back? Saul's not doing that. It's good politics. It's real good politics, especially in the ancient world. Nobody just sends your stuff back to you. This might be the first time that had happened in all of human history. I'm not exaggerating. Nobody sends your stuff back to you after you get raided. Except for David. It's good politics.
I'm struck, I've said here before, Rabbi, to my consternation, my Torah portion in my bar mitzvah was remember Amalek.
Yeah.
Can't come out from
Baruch Hashem.
Yeah. Here we've got it happen again and again, and some of the Amalekite cavalry escapes. I expect so we can attack them later too.
The Amalekites keep going,
Yeah.
and the Amalekites will, in every generation, try and kill the Jews. It's an understanding of the viciousness that's possible in human nature that makes us deeply uncomfortable as modern human beings. But it's something that people in the ancient world had no difficulty recognizing and no difficulty labeling.
Still here.
I'm not making any modern connections. I'm not saying to any modern peoples. I'm just saying the reason it's labeled so directly about the Amalekites is because these are a people, which is possible in people who they are unwilling to live with the Yehudim. They are unwilling to live with the Jews. Whether it's their descendant Haman, who will try and kill the Jews of Shushan, of Persia, or any of the possible descendants. These days, I don't know if we could identify an Amalekite if we saw one. I doubt it.
What I find interesting is that there appears to be a price to be paid for strength.
What's the price to be paid for strength?
You're gonna have to prove your strength over and over and over.
Absolutely. You're exactly correct. Because in the ancient world, that's how strength works. But thankfully, David has God to give him strength, because you need strength one way or the other. There's no world without the strong. I mean, there's no safety without the strong in a world like this.
So
And by the way, I say that, I mean that today too. I didn't mean anything before about today. That statement I mean today too. There's no safety without the strong.
we can expect this forever.
No, that's the thing. Not forever, just for now. Because we are working to improve ourselves and humanity to hopefully, at a point we do not understand, get us to the point of redemption. And when we have that, we are told that the peoples will be at peace. They'll beat their swords and spears into pruning hooks, and they will study war no more. Lo yisagoy el goy charev velo yamadu od milchama. We believe that day is coming. Is it coming tomorrow? I'm not a gambling man, but I wouldn't put odds on it. Is it coming in a week? That would be lovely. Is it coming on January 20th? Probably not. Is it coming? I don't know when it's coming. We pray now, right? That's why the Chabadniks are always saying we want Mashiach now. Right? They're always saying it because they want Mashiach to come right now. And we say, we're probably going to have to do a little bit of work to get there, because I don't know if the Chabadniks have looked around, but I'm not sure the planet is quite yet at the stage of redemption, though, again, I'd be happy to be wrong. Yeah. But strength is, in the world as it exists before God redeems us, strength is necessary. We're told there will come a day when the armies can lay down their arms and enter the peace of God.
Personalize this. I'm running out of time.
We're all running out of. But the thing is, here's the thing: you're not, though. I can also go into this other thing. You're not running out of time, because God says when redemption happens, you get to participate. Yeah, even if you're dead. I mean, you'll come back to life. I don't know if that means like zombie, like bones, or whether we're not exactly sure. By the way, that's why all those graves on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, why do you think they're buried there? Because they think they get to go first. Because the prophecy says that the Messiah will enter Jerusalem through the gate that's down at the bottom of that hill, which is currently closed up, but I assume that the Messiah will find a way to get through it. It's just closed up because it's been thousands of years. Not all the gates of Jerusalem are still functional, though many of them are. He's supposed to go down through that gate and enter Jerusalem. And when he comes down that hill, all of the people buried there will be the first ones to be.
Probably very expensive real estate.
It's unbelievably expensive real estate. I actually want to say, how much is a grave on Mount of... No. $30,000 or more to be first in line for resurrection. Okay. There you go. There's your answer. If you feel it to be a worthwhile investment for you, keep in mind there will also be fees in transporting yourself to Israel, and it is not cheap. As someone who has facilitated that once, that is hard. Also, they really don't want to do it, but they do, because I don't know why, but they do it. Anyway, so it's a big deal. Yeah. So remember, even you go to sleep for a while and you wake up and you go, ha, it's redemption. We did it. We made it. We're all celebrating now. Although you won't get to go first if you're in Topeka. They'll start in Jerusalem, and eventually it'll get out to you and you'll be like, right. Somebody else, your ancestors in Europe, will have gotten awake way before you, and they'll be like, Harold, why were you asleep so long? So, It's all, we'll see what happens, but that's the idea, kind of, on one foot, so to speak. Okay, chapter 31. So, the Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines, and many fell on Mount Gilboa. It's an important spot. The Philistines pursued Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, Avinadav, and Malchishua, sons of Saul. That's all Saul's sons, by the way. That's all three of them. They're dead now. The battle raged around Saul, and some of the archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Saul said to his arms bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, so that the uncircumcised may not run me through and make sport of me." But his arms bearer, in his great awe, refused, whereupon Saul grasped his sword and fell upon it. When his arms bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. Thus Saul and his 3 sons and his arms bearer, as well as all his men, died together on that day. Although some people survived. We're going to see that some people didn't die. But anyway, and when the Israelite inhabitants on the other side of the valley and on the other side of the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the towns and fled. The Philistines then came and occupied them. The next day, the Philistines came to strip the slain, and they found Saul and his 3 sons lying on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped him of his armor, and they sent them throughout the land of the Philistines to spread the news in the temples of their idols and among the people. They placed his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they impaled his body on the wall of Beit Shan. When the inhabitants of Yavesh Gilead heard about it, what the Philistines had done to Saul, the stalwarts among them set out and marched all night. They removed the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Beit Shan and came to Yavesh and burned them there. Yeah, and then they took the bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Yavesh, and they fasted for 7 days. And that is the end of the book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel, and the end of Saul. Yeah.
I guess Jonathan's death makes it easier for David to assume the kingship, but I'm surprised by that, given their relationship in life. That's one. I wonder if you'd comment on that. But secondly, I was surprised to read not that they retrieved the bodies, but they burned them, as if cremation were acceptable.
Well, they didn't really. I mean, yeah, I'll start with the cremation. It's not clear whether they cremated them or just, it's possible that the bodies were deeply disfigured, cut up, maggots, like all kinds of things, and that they were trying to purify them in a way. They scorched them is another way of reading that. Not burn them in total, but scorched them. So maybe just to clean a little bit of what had happened. They do bury them in the end under the tree. So they are buried in the end. I would focus on that part. As far as Jonathan and David's relationship, I think first of all, we have to remember that Jonathan and David's relationship is a lot embellished by us, especially postmodernists, who love to talk about the possible gay relationship they had. There's no real evidence for that. And the words they use, while beautiful and flowery, remember that in Elizabethan times, men would use very flowery, beautiful language for each other. They weren't all lovers. None of them were, very few of them were, not none of them, but very few of them were. But they all spoke that way because that was the language of that was the normal, there's a word, but I'm losing my mind. I can't remember it, but there's a word for that. That was the regular vernacular of the day. So their importance to each other was important, but it had also been a while since they'd seen each other. So keep that in mind too. David loved his wives. I mean, as for, I keep thinking I hear something, but I don't know. Anyway, as for their, what else can I expand on for their relation? It's like he dies. Jonathan dies in battle, loyal to his father, which we could assume he was going to be. It's not like David was there and saying, everyone come over to my banner, and he refused. It's just, he went to fight the fight. Of course, David just won a battle, but Saul didn't win a battle. Saul lost one bad. And he dies, and all his sons die. Makes it very clean, also. But all of his sons don't die. I want to preface, spoiler alert, they're not all dead. Shall we move on to Samuel 2, or do we want to? Okay. We'll start Samuel 2, chapter 1, and we'll get through the first chapter and we'll see what time it is. So 2 Samuel. After the death of Saul, Vayehi acharei mot Shaul, David had already returned from defeating the Amalekites. David stayed 2 days in Ziklag. On the third day, a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes rent and earth on his head, right? He escaped the battle, and he's dirty, and he's gotten, he hasn't had time. He couldn't even have time to fix his clothes. And as he approached David, he flung himself to the ground and bowed low. David said to him, "Where are you coming from?" He answered, "I have just escaped from the camp of Israel." "What happened? Tell me," asked David. And he told him how the troops had fled the battlefield, and that, moreover, many of the troops had fallen and died. Also, that Saul and his son Jonathan were dead. "How do you know?" David asked the young man who brought him the news, "that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" The young man who brought him the news answered, "I happened to be at Mount Gilboa. I saw Saul leaning on his spear, and the chariots and riders closing in on him. He looked around and saw me, and he called to me. When I responded, 'At your service,' he asked me, 'Who are you?' And I told him that I was an Amalekite. Then he said to me, 'Stand over me and finish me off, for I am in agony and am barely alive.' So I stood over him and finished him off, for I knew that he would never rise from where he was lying. Then I took the crown from his head and the armlet from his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord."
Even the Amalekites.
Well, he was like Yosef Hadad. Sorry, that would be the internet will think that's a little bit offensive. Nobody here will know what that means. Yosef Hadad is a Christian Arab Israeli who advocates for Israel. There are Arabs who advocate for Israel. There would be one or two Amalekites probably who lived in Judea, in Judah. So this is just, he just happens to be. David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and so did all the men with him, right? It's a sign of piety. The king is dead. They lamented and wept, and they fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the soldiers of God and the house of Israel who had fallen by the sword, right? So there's a lot of things to be sad about in this particular moment, right? David said to the young man who had brought him the news, "Where are you from?" He replied, "I am the son of a resident alien, an Amalekite." Right? So he's the son of a convert. He's ethnically an Amalekite, but he's a ger. So he's a convert. So he's a Jew, essentially. "How did you dare," David said to him, "to lift your hand and kill God's anointed?" Because again, David's had this strict rule all the time that it's impossible to kill the king. You shouldn't do it, which will help David if anyone ever listened to him, which nobody ever does. So It's a silly rule. I mean, seriously, he makes that rule, but nobody ever cares. Everyone keeps telling him he should kill Saul, and then this guy kills Saul, and then people try and kill him. So no one ever listens to the rule about not killing the king. But it was a good idea of David's. It just didn't come to anything. So thereupon David called one of the attendants and said to him, "Come over and strike him." He struck him down and he died. Not only was the Amalekite not rewarded for his deed, but he was executed for it. Remember, this is not the only time in history we see this. In fact, I doubt he would have read the story, but the great Julius Caesar does something very similar. Does anyone know the story of when Caesar received Pompey's head? The Egyptians, Pompey fled to Egypt after losing a big battle against Caesar's forces. And so Pompey fled to Egypt, where the Egyptians promptly had him murdered. And Ptolemy presented Pompey's head to Caesar, assuming Caesar would be glad to see his former friend and now chief rival and man trying to kill him dead. And of course, Caesar was furious, because what right had an Egyptian to kill a consul of Rome? And so, anyway, it's the same thing here, right? This guy thought, oh, I just did what I was, what I should do, right? Because the Egyptians were like, oh, this is great because Caesar's going to be the king, so we'll just show that we're on Caesar's side. It didn't work out that way. Same thing here, except before. It didn't work out here, right? The guard's like, oh, well, I just did what I was told, and then I came here to you. He probably should have been rewarded. It sounds like I would have rewarded him, but he broke David's big rule, and so not so much. So, he struck him down and he died. And David said to him, "Your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified against you when you said, I put God's anointed to death." I don't think that's really fair, since Saul was trying to kill himself and apparently failed to kill himself. Remember, in the end of the last book, it said he fell on his sword, but that's a testimony from a guy who didn't see the end of the story. Apparently, the story continues, and he fell on his sword, but didn't manage to kill himself. So he asked this guy to finish him off. Maybe.
There's another one there that I see. The Amalekites can be kind. The evil man can become a good man, but David doesn't accept that.
Also, David is breaking what will eventually be rabbinic law, which is that a court is not permitted to execute someone or even to administer lashes based on his confession. There have to be witnesses. Even if someone confesses, we don't take that unless they're confessing to a crime to say they didn't do a less serious crime, in which case we believe they didn't do the less serious crime. But you still need witnesses to put someone to death in rabbinic court. But David's the king. Or, I don't know, mini warlord. There is no king right now, so it's kind of hard. And David intoned this dirge over Saul and his son Jonathan. He ordered the Judahites to be taught the song of the bow. It is recorded in the book of Yashar. Again, remember, and this, yeah, it's a book also referenced in the book of Joshua. We don't have it. You're going to see also in these books, from here through Kings, they're going to be referenced to a couple of books that we're supposed to have, that we don't. We don't have the book of Yashar, or the book of straightness or righteousness, I guess you would call that. We also don't have the book of the annals of the kings of Israel and Judah, which are supposed to exist and referenced a lot in the book of Kings. Wherever those records went, we don't have them. We did, we'd know a lot more, but we don't have them. But they're referenced in the Bible. Look at this other book, and here they're referencing another book, just like it did in Joshua. Wherever this book is, we don't have it at the moment. Maybe it's in a cave somewhere. That's what we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 90s. We just found them in a cave. Maybe we'll get lucky again, and it'll be in a cave somewhere. Stranger things have happened. Verse 19, this is the song of the bow. Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen. And that's naflu giborim. Naflu giborim. How the heroes or mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gat. Do not proclaim it in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistine rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. O hills of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain on you, or bountiful fields. For there the shield of warriors lay rejected, the shield of Saul, polished with oil no more. From the blood of slain, from the fat of warriors, the bow of Jonathan never turned back. The sword of Saul never withdrew empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and cherished, never parted in life or in death. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in crimson and finery, who decked your robes with jewels of gold. How have the mighty fallen in the thick of battle? Jonathan, slain on your heights. I grieve for you, my brother Jonathan. You were most dear to me. Your love was wonderful to me, more than the love of women. How have the mighty fallen? The weapons of war perished. What's going on here? Talk to me about the Song of the Bow. First of all, it's not called the Song of the Sword and the Bow, right? Who's the bow? Yep, Jonathan. But this, again, is good politics. David is a gifted writer. We know this. He writes a lot of songs, a lot of poetry. You might have heard of the Psalms. David is the purported author of the Psalms. Right, yeah. So David is and we know he's musical because that's how he got into Saul's employ in the first place. He's a very musical, creative person, in addition to being a warrior. And so he uses that skill in effort of his politics as well. And here he writes this lament for Saul and Jonathan, which sets up Saul does have a living daughter, and his daughter's first husband was a guy named David, and he wrote this really nice song, and he's a winner in war. It's just all kind of coming together, isn't it? Who would you pick to be king at this moment if you were a random Israelite? How could you not pick David? I mean, if you had to pick, how could you not pick David? And we do get the more, if anyone wants to talk to me, it's interesting. My translation read that your love was wonderful to me more than the love of women. Another translation is your love for me surpassed the love of women. In other words, your love for me was stronger and more emotionally powerful than that of women. Because they were blood brothers, right? They were war makes tight bonds that are hard to understand. He loves his wives very much, but there's something different about, he kind of grew up with Jonathan in a way. He was still a Na'ar when he killed Goliath and became let alone before that when he was in the court as a youthful shepherd lute, player. So he kind of grew up with Jonathan. They were kind of like brothers. Jonathan is almost his Ramses in a way, right? In a weird inverted mirror look, the way Moses grew up with Ramses.
But this kind of connection is fairly common among combat troops.
Yes. Sure, I'm just saying, like,
if you risk your life and they risk their life, it is a different kind of love, but it is a very close caring.
Absolutely, for sure.
And the biggest problem is when your buddy gets killed.
And so he writes this song where it's for both of them, which is politically smart. But he writes the love in the song comes through for Jonathan. He wrote the song because he was so moved by Jonathan's death, not Saul's death, right? And he mentions the sword, but it's the song of the bow. right? It's about Jonathan, really, because this is his response, because he feels so deeply saddened that he was hoping Jonathan was in God's plan to be his general or something, to be around once he became king. He never planned on killing Jonathan, even if that's not great politics. He never planned on killing Jonathan. He probably would have killed the other two brothers, but he probably wouldn't have killed Jonathan or Michal. But Jonathan didn't. And as it says in the song, Jonathan, even though he said, I'm with you even against my father, and even though he knew his father was nuts, it's that bond, it's that family that he stuck with him.
Never thought of that before, but that's a very, in a way, nice ending for Jonathan. He dies clean.
Yeah, totally. He upholds all of his oaths, and he never has to break an oath, which makes him which makes it all good. Which is, it's just sad.
To be buried in a VA cemetery to be with their brothers.
Sure. Sure, yeah. Or Arlington I knew a lot of people. Growing up in DC, I knew a lot of people buried at Arlington. Or not a lot of people, but you know what I mean.
Archetype.
Right, yeah.
Like the one in Lebanon.
Sure. I know there are other military cemeteries, but in any event. Okay, now we've gotten to this point, and when we pick up next time, we are going to get to the politics have to be observed so that we can get David on the throne and get to the rest of David's story. Yes. It takes a little while, and of course, David will he'll have some trials, but he'll be. One day we should really do like a close reading, like with Samuel on one side and Chronicles on the other, and see how the story is told differently, column by column, because it's a different story a little bit. But anyway, thank you for joining me on this Shabbat